Okay, let's add and subtract some fractions, and it's just like the common denominators and equivalent fraction lesson, but this time we're actually going to add and subtract them. So let's start with 1/5 plus 1/2. Well, we know that we cannot add fractions with different denominators. We need to find the common denominator. So let's do that by using the big M and finding the least common multiple. So we're going to use 5 and 2 because they're our denominators. Let's skip count or find the multiples of 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Stop right there because I believe we can find our common multiple by doing, after we skip count 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Well, we've written down some of our multiples. Let's find the common multiple. And I believe we have one right there, which right now also looks like our least common multiple, which will be 10. So 10 now is our least common multiple, but we will now turn him into our least common denominator. We want a common denominator so that we can add our fractions, because again, we can't add 1/5 and 1/2. We want to be able to have a common denominator, something that's the same. So I'm going to change my 1/2 into tenths. And remember, I set that up as a multiplication problem. I'm multiplying by 1 whole. But in this case, it's going to look like maybe 3/5 or 5/5 or 6/6. I'm sorry, 3/3, 5/5, 6/6. Let's try that again. So let's look here. So 2 times what equals 10? Well, I know that 2 times 5 equals 10. So whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do the same up here in the numerator. So I'm going to multiply by 5. And there's my whole that I was talking about, 5/5. So 1/2 times 5/5 will give me an equivalent or equal fraction. So what's 1 times 5? 5. Well, and that kind of makes sense because 5 is half of 10, which means 5/10 is equal to 1/2. Now let's find the equivalent fraction of 1/5. So I set it up as a multiplication problem. 5 times what equals 10? Well, looking at my big M, I know it takes 2 steps. 5 times 1, 5 times 2. So 5 times 2 equals 10. Now I have to do the same thing that I did with my denominator up here with my numerator. So now I can multiply 1 times 2, which is 2. Notice I did 1/5 times 1, and I got an equivalent fraction of 2/10. These are my new equivalent fractions. So I'm going to take 2/10 plus 5/10, and now I am allowed to add them because of a common denominator. And 5 plus 2 is 7, and the denominator stays the same. And there's my answer for 2/5 plus 5/10. Let's try another one. I'll put a line there. We're going to do 1/4 plus 3/8. Okay. Notice again my denominators are different. I cannot add them. So I need to find the LCM, the least common multiple. Put my 4 and my 8. And now finding my multiples means I'm just skip counting. So I'm going to skip count by 4s. Find my multiples. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 7 is 28. Stop right there for right now. And now I'm going to go with my 8s. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 6 is 48. Alright, so I just found my multiples. but I have to find my common, circle my common multiples, which are 8. I also see 16, and I also see 24. Okay, and so I want to find my least common multiple, which looks like it's going to be 8, which now tells me my least common denominator, my new denominator, will be 8. Well, this is kind of cool. Since I want my denominator to be 8, 3 eighths is already there. He's already an 8. So I'm going to keep him, and I'm going to change the 1/4 into something eighths. Alright, so I set up my multiplication problem. Okay, and so I ask myself, 4 times what equals 8? Well, it looks like 4 times 2. And then whatever I do with my denominator, I must do with my numerator. And then I ask myself, what is 1 times 2? Which is 2. And now I've got my new fractions that I can add together. So I can do 2 eighths plus 3 eighths equals 5 eighths. Okay? So let's do one more, and we're going to make it as a subtraction problem. So let's now try, and subtraction is just the same way. So we're going to try 9/10 minus 2/5. So let's try that and see how that works out. So we're going to do our big M. Okay, and we're going to put our denominators up here. And why are we doing that? Because we cannot subtract two fractions that have unequal denominators. We need to find our common denominator. So we're going to multiply or find our multiples of 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. Stop right there, and I'll find my multiples of 10, which is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Okay, those were our multiples. Let's find the common ones. Looks like 10 and 20 and 30. Okay, and I could keep going and find a bunch more, but there are my common multiples right there. Let's find the least, which looks like our least, our smallest multiple is 10. And what is 10 going to become? He's going to become my new denominator. Well, again, look at there. I want 10 to be my denominator. Well, I've already got a tenths. So I'm going to leave him there. And the only one I have to change is my 2/5. I'm going to draw a line here to kind of separate. So I'm going to set my multiplication problem up here. And I want to change 5ths, 2/5 into something tenths. So how do I do that? Well, I ask myself, 5 times what equals 10? Well, I know I'm going to multiply by 2, because 5 times 2 is 10. I'm going to do the same up here, because I want to multiply by 1. 2/5 times 1. Well, what is 2 times 2? 2 times 2 is 4. Now I've got my new fractions that I can subtract. And I can do 9/10 minus 4/10. And 9 minus 4 is 5. And my denominator is going to stay the same. So my answer to 9/10 minus 4/10 is 5/10. However, I can simplify 5/10. Well, how do I do that? Well, here's where I need to find the greatest common factor. And a quick way of doing that is just writing all the factors that equal 5. What times what equals 5? Well, I know 5 times 1 equals 5. And that's it, because he's a prime number. Now I can move on to 10. Now 10's composite. He's going to have more factors. I know that 10 times 1 and 5 times 2. They both equal 10. So there's all my factors. Now I need to find the common ones. Well, I know 1 and 1 are is in common, and it looks like 5s are in common. Now I need to find the greatest common factor, which is 5. Now because I'm simplifying, I'm going to divide and make these fractions make this fraction a little simpler to work with. So now I say to myself, well, what's 5 divided by 5? And that's 1. And what's 10 divided by 5? And that's 2. So I can simplify 5/10 into a half. So 9/10 minus 4/10 equals 5/10, which also equals 1/2.